Flight attendants and pilots of Reddit, what are some things that happen mid-flight that only the crew are aware of? There's a special frequency called guard that all aircraft are supposed to monitor. It's for emergencies, or for when an aircraft ends up on a wrong frequency and the controllers need to get contact with them to change them to the right frequency. It's full of pilots meowing at each other, and people accidentally asking for gate assignments and making other radio calls. Pilot here. We only get paid when the doors are closed and the pushback has commenced. If we're delayed or sitting with the door open, we're just as annoyed as you are. At altitude we're constantly in contact with air traffic control and change to different center frequencies, or control for other than us locations. We're also doing fuel checks to make sure the fuel burn isn't abnormal, dodging weather, and probably itching about scheduling. Pilots are on their phones or reading the newspaper all the time. Oftentimes they are browsing Reddit. What's up? Pilot is sleeping and co-pilot is flying and there are dead bodies in the cargo. Source: my mom, who is a former flight attendant. Sounds pretty normal, to be honest. Bodies get repatriated by air all the time. Pilots need to sleep, and that's what co-pilots are for. The scariest moment of my day is when the FAR opens the internal bag door, the closet we all throw our overnight bags in, without calling us in the flight deck first. That ding and master caution gets me every time. I've got an original one for you all. There is a radio frequency we all are required to monitor. It's called guard. It's for emergency use and is designed for maydays, and for air traffic control to reach aircraft that may have lost radio contact, or to relay messages from aircraft to other aircraft, etc. Every day this frequency is abused. You will hear hundreds of professional aviators meowing, yelling obscenities at each other, and making fun of one airline or another. Oftentimes what will start it is some poor guy accidentally transmitting his PA announcement to passengers on the guard frequency, followed by the very mature outbreaks for about 5-10 minutes. It's the worst on the East Coast. Edit: just today I heard an airline aircraft trying to relay info about a medical emergency on this frequency through one of their fellow company aircraft. They couldn't finish any of their sentences without people yelling, "Yeah on guard, hey nobody cares about yeah passenger, hey you're on guard 2A." My uncle was a pilot. He says that most people don't understand how much of the airplane is run by computers. The pilots are necessary, but a lot of the elements of flying are automated nowadays. There's a joke about the Airbus A380 that goes: the A380 comes with a pilot and a dog. The pilot is there to feed the dog. The dog is there to bark at the pilot if he tries to touch anything. A former teacher told us a story that fits the question. Every year he would make trips to Europe that were for an educational experience, or related to the subject he taught in one way or another. In reality, it was just an amazing way to spend 2 weeks in Europe. One year he took a student's brother with, since he needed an extra person to have the minimum amount of required students. After the 10-hour flight, the flight attendant walks up to him and asks if said brother was a part of his group. He says yes. Apparently, on the flight he stopped the flight attendant and asked her to have sex with him in the bathroom. She denied, but he continued to ask her several more times through the flight. It reached a point to where she no longer felt anywhere near comfortable. She asked my teacher if she could notify the authorities and have him sent back to the States. He agreed. There were no immediate flights back home, so a distant relative of his had to be contacted. He stayed with a relative he had never even met for an entire weekend. He was then put on a flight back home the following week. TLDR: kid repeatedly asks flight attendant to have sex with him during his 10-hour flight. She contacts authorities. He gets sent back. Edit 1. Spelling. Flight attendants don't get paid on the ground. Only flying hours are paid. We are slave labor on the ground and duties are continually added to our unpaid work time because the company knows they don't have to pay us. We show up 2 to 3 hours before we even start getting paid, and some days we will work up to 14 hours and only get paid for 5 or 6 of those hours. It should be illegal. Please be kind when you are boarding the plane and getting all pissy about your bags etc. The flight attendant is a volunteer while she is helping you on the ground. She is essentially doing you a favor. A lady who was feeling very ill crapped her pants mid-flight. A very kind farm managed to get her covered in a blanket and into the bathroom with barely anyone noticing, and then gave her a pair of her own pants to wear so she wouldn't be embarrassed. This started off with us blissfully unaware, ended with mild pants sheeting. I was flying to France in one of those planes with the TV screen up front to show the flight path and where you currently are. I was just about to fall asleep when the captain asked over the PA if there was a doctor on board and if they could go to seat. I knew this was bad. The flight path changed to Canada and we had to make an emergency landing. We were stuck there for 2 hours. When we finally got to France, his entire row was quarantined off. I have no idea what the duck happened. Not a flight attendant or a pilot. But I discovered there is such a thing as airhead when I saw one of the flight attendants giving a BJ to one of the pilots mid-flight. Now, the thing to keep in mind was this was before 9/11. When the cockpit wasn't kept so securely locked. There was a bit of a bug spreading around the plane, which I was asked to take care of since I was the only doctor on board. I made my way to the cockpit to inform the pilot of the condition of the passengers, and as soon as I opened the door, I see the flight attendant bent over with her head in the pilot's lap. I could not believe what I was seeing. But I managed to snag a quick photo of it. Far here. At mid-flight I noticed a strange thing with one of the slides was not armed properly and had an issue with it. However, we landed safely and nobody of the packs knew nothing. Pilot here. Most of the time the passengers are not given the full answer on why a flight is delayed or cancelled. Airlines will typically blame cancellations on unrelated events, weather, instead of mechanical issues, so they don't have to pay for hotel rooms, meals etc. Also, chemtrails are not real. For those of you who believe they are real, give your head a shake. As an air traffic controller, we are constantly swearing and yelling at pilots when we're not on the frequency, and then when we key up we use our nice guy voices. I worked with a pilot that was really old. He couldn't stay awake in flight. The first officer kept having to poke him and wake him up. We kept feeding him black coffee, but it didn't help much. I asked him if he was retiring soon, but he said he couldn't afford it because our airline has no pension program and the pay scale is pathetic. Pretty scary. One of my all-time favorites is the captain accidentally broadcasting his passenger briefing, "Welcome aboard," weather in Chicago and so on frequency instead of the aircraft PA system. Blocking up ground, ramp, tower, etc. For a solid 15 seconds. You automatically become the laughing stock of the airport. We sat in a backed up queue for hours in Denver one time. The weather had the airport socked in. Nobody was going anywhere until this giant supercell cleared the end of the runway. During that time suddenly there appeared a mechanic at the front of the cabin on the PA holding up a 2-foot long piece of metal he had pulled from one of the tires. He explained if the plane hadn't been sitting waiting he might have never spotted it. It could have come flying out during takeoff roll and penetrated the plane's wing, igniting fuel. Or whatever. Everyone cheered him. What a hero. He possibly saved our lives. To this day I have no idea why they let him come on board and tell us this. Ex-airline employee here. Often we'd have someone on board with terrible body odor. You can set the temperature in one end of the cabin hotter and it localizes the smell to one part of the plane. If you see coffee filter bags hanging anywhere, it's because someone smells like openness somewhere on the plane. FARs often talk about the hot guy in 23B or whatever seat he's in. Pilots duck around a lot up front. They'll take pictures, post on FB, watch movies. Automation has taken over a lot of the work on long flights. Edit, not really on topic. But don't ever walk barefoot or in socks on an airplane. The same mop that mops the lav mops the galley. My cousin is a flight attendant. It's not mid-flight, but airplane lines will fly attendants all over the country just in case they're needed elsewhere. My cousin had to fly out from Portland to Seattle and some other places all in one trip. Never having to work. Also, if you are sick you have to show up anyway and let the people in charge decide if you can fly or not. If you don't, you get 3 warnings and you're fired. Not sure if it's been mentioned already. I was learning to be cabin crew at college, and in the event that someone dies on board, the CC, cabin crew, make it less obvious that they have passed. Put glasses on them. Maybe a hat. Essentially dress them up as subtle as possible to not alert and or panic the other passengers. Far here. Crop dusting. Basically farting whilst we walk down the aisle due to the bloating. If you fly frequently there's a high chance an FAR has farted right by your head as they walk down the aisle. There's a 600-page book in the cockpit with every single thing that can possibly go wrong. From a bulb going out to an engine falling off. A biohazard or a gone threat. As an airline agent I can't even tell you how often the crew is hungover. More often than not. Also the flight attendants use their personal phones Wi-Fi in flight, but that's probably not very surprising. Not an airline pilot yet, just got hired by my first airline and start class next month, but I've been a pilot for 6 years. I primarily teach Chinese airline pilots how to fly, but I've done some passenger operations in business aircraft on the side. First of all the comments about pilots making cat sounds and Chewbacca noises is 100% true. Also, whenever someone leaves an area and switches frequencies, they yell "see ya" and then a dozen other pilots will key up yelling "see ya" one after another. We also enjoy talking shit about people who say with you, "Got M on the fish finder, any traffic please advise," and tree and fife. Also, the things that scare passengers don't faze the pilots one bit. We don't give a shit about turbulence or having to do a go around. The things I don't like are things you generally won't know about: thunderstorm dodging, microburst alerts, ice, maintenance issues, etc. I'm not a pilot or flight attendant, but I have a good working relationship with my teacher and his friends who is a mechanic and pilot respectively. One such thing that happened was he had to fix the navigation mid-flight. Don't fly with an ear infection or fluid in your ears. There is a chance you can rupture your eardrum. Flight crews are especially susceptible to this since we are constantly going through pressurization and depressurization when we work. I used to travel a lot for work, and I made this mistake thinking I wasn't that sick. I could feel the pressure slowly leave my inner ear during ascent. During descent my ears wouldn't equalize and I thought they were going to implode. That was a very painful 5 days of antibiotics while I was waiting for the infection to go away enough that my ears could equalize again. Normal uneventful flight. I don't think there was Wi-Fi available on the flight. When we land, we are greeted by tons of heavily armed National Guard, police, SAR, K9s. The Paris terror attacks happened about an hour or so into our flight. Passengers had no idea that the attack had happened until everyone got cell phone reception and floods of "are you okay" texts. I assume the crew knew the whole time. As soon as it happened, never said a word about it. Pilot here. Guard frequency is basically pilot Reddit. It's just people meowing and making fart noises. It's literally set up to monitor for aircraft in distress, emergencies or radios being in the wrong frequency, but it's so safe here in the US to fly that it's basically one big meme. That the captain had a heart attack and passed away mid-flight and he's the reason we have to have an unscheduled stop. Not to refuel. Edit, I was a cabin crew back for a 5-star international airline. Former flight attendant here. Landing gear got stuck on descent. We flew in circles for ages just waiting to find out if we needed to crash land or not. Luckily the gear eventually came down. Passengers never knew something was wrong. One time I accidentally spilled coffee creamer on a bald dude's head while he was sleeping during service. Myself and everyone around him silently agreed to say nothing. He looked as if a bird pooped on his head. I still feel guilty about it. Never drink the coffee. I have never seen those machines cleaned. I've had one near collision in my 11-year airline career, but have had a few TCAS, traffic avoidance collision system, warnings where the other pilot or myself, depending on who was flying at the time, have had to comply with the airplane's instructions to climb or descend to avoid another airplane. Ex-ground crew here. On a Boeing 777-300 Air near the back galley. There is a hidden door that is approx 24 inches wide. Once you open that door, there is a small staircase that brings you to the crew rest area where there are a few beds. Nobody is ever pronounced dead on a commercial flight. The crew will perform CPR until the body is removed from the plane. Otherwise, the coroner's office can impound the aircraft for days until their investigation is complete. If a physician on board declares the patient dead, well, bummer for the airline. More than once I came into work to find a deceased passenger in the locker room, waiting for the coroner to pick up the body. Also, dead people are transported as cargo on commercial flights. We refer to them as human remains. If you see a long rectangular cardboard box the size of a coffin being carefully loaded into a cargo bin by several rampers, it's human remains. My boyfriend is a pilot on a Phenom 300. People that fly in his jet are constantly having sex. They drink and have raunchy sex while him and his captain have to sit there and listen because it's only a curtain and not a door. They leave used condoms and cum stains all the time. He is the unlucky one that has to Clorox wipe it all off when they get out. Also, when his passengers are annoying and drinking, he will decrease the cabin pressure so the alcohol hits them much harder and they go to sleep.